Hey guys, this is Sebastian, Natural Mystic Pollock, bringing you a quick theory video for RakebackDollars.com. Today we're going to be talking about value betting the river. I feel that this is an area that a lot of small and micro stakes players struggle with, and this is an area that can really help improve players' win rate to take their game to the next level, whether that's going from a break-even player to a slightly winning player or taking a marginal winner and giving them a better win rate. So let's get started. Okay, first we have to define what a value bet is. This is my definition of a value bet. It's when, a value bet is when we bet our hand with the expectation that a worse hand will call us. So pretty straightforward. So obviously we feel like we have a good hand and we want to bet it to make a little bit of money. Before we can value bet our hand, first we need to ask ourselves some very basic questions. The most obvious question would be, are we ahead or behind of our opponents? If we answer, if we feel that we're ahead of our opponents, then we're going to want to value bet. If we feel that we are behind our opponent, then obviously we're not going to be value betting, and then the line will be changed. So, assuming we answer yes to this question, next we have to answer: does our opponent have a strong holding or a marginal holding? This will help determine what the sizing of our value bet, and we will look into that next when we talk about some of the common mistakes when it comes to value betting the hands on the river. And then the next question, the last question, is how big of a bet will villain call with their particular hand? Okay, these are three of the common mistakes that I see regarding value betting. First, value betting hands that no worse hand can call. So, for instance, I find this a lot of the time where players who are playing one street at a time, maybe they have like a top pair type hand, they're playing against a regular type opponent, and then they bet the flop, they bet the turn, and then they're kind of left in that tricky spot with a top pair hand where they're like, well, this guy's, they're not sure what to do, and then they bet the river, or and there's a lot of other types of examples, but, maybe a board comes 4 to a straight and you have a set, or, there's a lot of different areas. But again, a lot of the time this is a issue that I find, people get into problems with, where they try to bet hands that, again, no worse hand can call, just typically because of the board structure or because of the way the hand went down. The second big problem or mistake that I see a lot of small and micro stakes players making, and this may be probably the biggest mistake that I see, is they're not value betting thin enough. So more times than not, a lot of the time I'll see a guy, they'll bet 1 or 2 small streets, and then they'll just be very happy to check down the river. And a lot of the time when I'm talking to either students or people that I'm just talking with, the common answer is, oh, I was just happy to see a cheap showdown, or I didn't think he would call worse here on the river. But a lot of the time, it's really a very quick decision where people check quickly and they're just so happy to get a showdown that they don't think if they can extract that last dollar. And again, with how difficult the games are today, I think milking that every last dollar out is really important, and that comes down to understanding our opponents and understanding what their calling ranges are and that sort of thing. So I think that's probably, for a lot of the taggy type players, I think that's probably the biggest mistake that I see. And then lastly, the third biggest mistake I probably see is value betting based on our own hand strength and not the opponent. So this will typically be, let's say, you river the nuts or something like that, and then people go all in, or they bet pot, or they just they just don't bet appropriately. They're just thinking about, okay, I have a strong hand, so therefore I want to bet big. Or conversely, it may be, well, I have a weak hand, so maybe I'm just going to bet real small to try to get a little bit of value, and that's their thinking. But when it comes to value betting, value betting needs to be based on our opponent's hand strength and not based on our hand strength. Again, that goes back to, is our hand ahead or behind our opponents, and if we are ahead, how strong is their hand? It really doesn't make sense to be, if we hit, the nut flush on the river, to be betting pot or going all in if we think our villain has bottom pair or something like that. So we have to really take into account, what does our opponent have, and again, how big a bet will they call in this spot? before we can value bet. And okay, we're going to take a look at 3 examples of value betting and how this applies. Alright guys, let's take a look at some hands and how we put value betting into practice here. So we're just going to go through. So I'm opening, this is a 100 no limit Euro table, and I'm opening the pocket threes four-handed. I think that's pretty standard. So we get a call here from an 86-9-83. So this tells me this guy is a very loose passive player. He's going to be calling with any piece, with any pair, and things of that nature. So obviously on this board we flop a set, and we are going to be betting for maximum value here on the flop. So we bet pot here, and we get a call. When I get a call here on the flop on this type of board texture, I think this villain can have just his range is so wide here. He can have any piece of this board. He could have 2 overcards and a flush draw. He could have an overpair. There's a lot of cards that he could have here. So again, I'm just going to be betting big and hoping that he calls, which he does. So then the turn brings a jack, a pretty innocuous card for me. Once again, I'm going to be betting big if he's got, this type of opponent. He's a loose passive player that appears to like to chase a lot. So again, we're going to be betting big for value, and again, trying to get as much money in as possible. So he calls here. When he calls here on the river here, I think his range consists of either he could still be chasing a flush draw with a hand like, with an ace of hearts, king of hearts, queen of hearts, and 2 overcards. He could have a jack. He could have had a flush draw and just made a top pair with the jack. Or again, he could still, have some sort of, maybe he has like 10s or 8s or 9s that he's getting sticky with. So when the board pairs here, now I want to be betting for maximum value. So if he has a hand like 9s or 10s, he's probably not going to be calling another bet here. Maybe I could squeeze another small bet out of him, but I want to get top maximum value from the top of his range. So if he has a flush, I know he's never folding here, and I know this type of villain as well. If he has a jack, like if he turned a jack and just hit trip jacks, again, there's no way he's going to be folding his hand here. So I'm going to be betting all in for value and hoping to get a worse hand to call here. So I just bet all in here, and he happens to call, and he shows up with a jack. So he had, again, on the flop he called with a 2 overcards and a flush draw, turn top pair, river chips, and we got maximum value from our hand. So here again, against value betting here against this type of opponent, we put his range into what we thought he would call with, and then we bet accordingly to that range there. So here's another hand very similar to that, where we used an overbet to get maximum value. So we have a 40, 30, 26, 9% 3-bet. So this type of opponent is playing pretty aggressively, and playing his hands pretty aggressively and playing pretty wide, and so I consider him to have a pretty wide range. So with ace-10 in position, 5-handed, I don't mind playing this hand in position against this wider range. Ace-10, I think in general, is usually a bit wide to call an under-the-gun range, but against this opponent, I feel fairly comfortable playing it. So we've flopped the virtual nuts here. So he bets here. So again, no need to raise here. It's very unlikely that he connected hard with this board when we have trips. So we're just going to call here. So the 6 comes, pretty blank card, so he checks. So we're going to bet big here to get a call, and he calls. So the 10, the river brings a 10 here. So he checks here again, and I bet all in. The reason I bet all in here is the fact that this guy's a loose player. He appears to be a weaker opponent, and I figure if he has a boat, he's never going to be folding a boat here. So I think a lot of the times he could put me on a missed flush draw or possibly even a missed straight draw. And I think if he has an overpair, such as queens, kings, or aces, he's never folding. And I think a lot of the time he's even calling here with jacks, thinking that we're chopping with jacks full of 10s or something like that. So I overbet for value here, knowing that, without an overpair, without a jack, he's probably folding anyway. So I just put in the maximum bet to try to get a call. And lo and behold, he had queen jack, and we got max value from our hand in this particular spot. Here with ace king, Villain limps in. Again, we have a 63, 10, 70 villain. This is our typical loose passive opponent who we're looking to get maximum value from, and he's folding 46, 20, 50, flop, turn, river, respectively. So again, a guy who doesn't particularly like to fold. So we're going to be making a big raise here to try to get more money in versus a dominated range. And we're going to follow up here with a small c-bet. I think against this type of opponent, they're not going to be folding that often. So I'm making my c-bet smaller to maybe look like I'm trying to milk. Plus, I think that his range is pretty weak here. That if he calls 1 here, I'm going to be firing a lot of double barrels here too. Even though this opponent doesn't appear to be the type that's real good to be firing 2 barrels against. I figure if I make a smaller flop bet and I bet on the turn here, a lot of the time he might give up. So he calls. So I bet again here against this opponent. Again, he limped from the button, so I just don't think that he's too strong here. And if he calls here, I'm going to be giving up here and not putting any more money in on the river here. So he calls here. So at this point, I'm pretty much going to be giving up unless I improve. And lo and behold, I get lucky here and spike a king on the river. Now the question is again, we thought this opponent's hand range was fairly weak, and he limped from the button, and he called the flop in the turn. And so what types of hands can he call on the river with when the king comes? Well, if we don't want to be, if we bet too big, he's not going to be calling with a pair of 7s, a pair of 8s if we bet, 80 or 90 most likely. So, if he's got a hand like, one 8 in his hand, a 7 in his hand, something like that, we want to get value from him. At the same time, if we bet too big, we're only going to get called by maybe either top pair or if he has a random 2 pair. So we want to bet small enough here to allow him to call with a lone 8 or a lone 7 or something like that, but also bet small enough that where if he raises us, it's really going to be pretty easy to get away from the hand as well. So I think 34 is a pretty good amount here to bet and hope again that we're going to get looked up by his range. He calls, and lo and behold, he calls us with ace-2 with bottom pair here. And again, we got maximum value when we hit our king on the river. So we've got 7-8 here, so we raise, we get called. Again, this particular opponent is playing a 46-7-42 with a 2% 3-bet. So again, this type of opponent, loose passive player, typically is only going to be betting or raising us with better strength hands. So we flop trip, so obviously we're going to be betting for value here. We get called. The turn brings the flush. Again, we're not really too worried about it here, so we're going to be betting again, knowing that a lot of the time these loose passive players, they get a little bit more timid when the flush card comes. So we're going to be betting a little bit smaller because what cards can he really call? Yeah, if he has a jack, he can call here, so we want to get value from a jack. But this board's starting to get pretty wet. So we want to get some value here, so we bet again for value. So the river comes again. We bet 10 here on the river because against this type of opponent, I want to get value from his his top pair type hand, maybe even 9s, maybe even like a weak pair like 7s or 6s that he can't just throw down, throw away. And again, on this texture, I don't think that a lot of weaker hands are going to be, calling with the read that I had on this opponent. This opponent jams all in against us, and this is a spot where we fold. I think that this is a good example of betting for value and folding against this type of opponent. I never think he's raising a top pair hand here, and I never think he's raising worse than a flush in this spot. On a paired board with a flush and straights on it, I never think he's raising worse than trips here. So again, that's why I bet small to get value from the bottom part of his range, and it makes it an easy fold. Again, this is a spot where I think that a lot of players, again, are afraid to bet fold here in this particular spot. They go, well, what worse hands are going to call? I'm just going to check back. But I think we lose value by not betting. But at the same time, when we bet, we have to be willing to bet and to be able to get away from the hand here. So I think bet folding in this spot against this particular type of opponent who is a loose passive is going to be the right play here. And this in this last hand that we're looking at here, this is a spot where we're going to be looking at the concept of betting. What is our opponent's range and what worse hands can call us here in this particular spot. So weak opponent 77, 25, 47 limps in. Folded to us. We're just going to call here, usually with ace-2. They're not really a good enough hand to play, but again, with a weaker opponent who's limped in and it only costs us $1 more with $1 of dead money already in there, I think that this is fine to be calling here. So we check, it gets checked around. So we improve to an ace here, and again, there's no worse aces that people can have, so I don't see the merit in betting. And when it gets checked around here, I know that nobody has a strong hand. With flush draws and straight draws, it's very unlikely that anybody has any of strong hand here. So when the 7 comes on the river, I make a minimum bet here for value of $2, knowing that hoping to get a hero called by possibly a jack. Again, I don't think anybody is a king because I think somebody, maybe Rooney, may have bet the king on the flop, but if not, I think when I bet 2 here on the river that I get called by a king or a jack here. So we're just betting real small to get thin value, and if we get raised, it makes it a pretty easy fold in this spot, even if we get bluffed off our hand. So Rooney folds and Serini calls, and we get looked up by queen high. So again, I think that this is a perfect example of looking for thin value. There's really not much value to be had from our hand, but again, I think that it's better to put in a small bet where we might get some value, and if everybody folds, that's fine as well. And if we get hero called by, I wasn't expecting to get called by queen high here. I was thinking possibly, a pair of 8s, a pair of 9s, maybe jack 10, at best a king or something like that. And if somebody is a weak ace, I don't think anybody's going to be raising. They'll probably just calling. So, our value bet also kind of acts as a blocking bet as well too, where if maybe Rooney improved to like a weak ace there or something like that, but he was looking to check, maybe hoping that Serini would bet or something like that, and then he was going to value bet the river or something like that. So I don't think that a lot of the time, we're never going to, it's going to be unlikely that we get raised here a lot of the time, especially against these villain types. So I think that that's a good spot again to be looking to bet for thin value. So some of the spots that we looked at real quick just to review is with our big hands, when we think our opponent will call with worse, just betting for maximum value, even if that's betting over pot. I think it is also understanding, especially with that ace-king hand, understanding our opponent's range and understanding what's the maximum value we can get to call by their weaker hands, and understanding that and being able to bet there. I think with the 7-8 hand, we saw a good example of betting for value, but at the same time understanding on a certain type of board texture against a certain type of opponent that we're only going to be getting raised by better. So that's when a value bet turns into a fold. And then in this last example here, where we're going to be betting for very thin value, trying to eke out just that little extra bit of profit from a hand. So I'm looking forward to guys' comments and questions regarding value betting. Again, I think this is a very important issue to address, and I will be answering any questions in the forums and such. So this is Sebastian, Natural Mystic Pollock, signing off for RakebackDollars.com.